Hello, I'm Chris Dorsett, and I'm speaking to a truly global audience from the library at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, where, in my capacity as director of the Centre's Associate Artist Scheme, I'm going to chair today's book launch event. One of the pleasures of directing this scheme is the wide range of research activities artists undertake in relation to the field of Hindu studies. Christian de Vietri is one of our members, and his new book, Trika Maṇḍala Prakāśa, is just such a project. There's a paperback version and a hardback version. When an artist undertakes an ambitious venture like this, a special sensitivity to procedure and mechanism, method and practice, gives readers access to a unique way of contributing knowledge. This book brings together creative practice and rigorous scholarship. Christian is undoubtedly a scholar, but he's also a celebrated sculptor. His 100-foot-high spander, Divine Vibration, dominates the quayside in Perth, Australia. After earning an MFA from Columbia University in 2009, he was active in the New York art scene, but later shifted his interest to Shilpa Shastra and Shakta Shaiva Tantra. He is a teacher of both practices, and this is his first book. To mark the occasion, we are hosting an online conversation between Christian and Christopher Wallis, Harish, a renowned scholar and practitioner of classical Tantra. Harish was initiated into this practice at 16 and has studied extensively in both India and the West, earning multiple degrees, including a PhD in Sanskrit. He's been influential in the revival of non-dual Tantra, has 3 best-selling books on the subject, and teaches an online community through his platform Tantrailluminated.org. We will have time for some questions, so if you write them in the chat box, I'll put them to the author and his respondent at the end of their discussion. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Christian. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Christopher, for your kind introduction. And thank you also to the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies for graciously hosting this event. So Chris invited me back in 2022 to be an associate artist at the centre. And at that time, we weren't quite sure what that would mean. But we're stepping into what it can be now, and not only for me, but for others who will follow. The Centre has successfully established an evolving intellectual dialogue in the field of Hindu studies with a high level of academic integrity by world-class scholars. So I'm very grateful for the invitation to contribute to the conversation here today. There are so many people who directly helped with the production of this book, who I'd like to thank. Emily Pott, Sarah Gates, Acharya Krishnan, Acharya Vikas, Pranat Kaul, Pony Selvanathan, and the core Sharada team, and of course my family, friends, and teachers. So when you have a copy of the book, please do refer to the acknowledgements where their contributions are noted in more detail. So I'd like to thank Christopher Harish Wallis for joining us here today. And before I hand it over to Harish, I'd like to say just a few words about the personal significance of his presence here. So I met Harish in 2013 in New York, where I was living at that time. And Harish came to give a series of talks about a non-dual Shaiva Tantra at the yoga studio where I'd been practicing postural yoga for several years. It was a pivotal moment in my life because it opened up the wider panorama of yogic study and practice beyond postural yoga. I had a very deep recognition of truth whilst in the presence of Harish that night, and a process of quite radical internal transformation was undoubtedly initiated. It's hard for me to describe in a way what occurred inside, but within a week I had sublet my apartment in New York, and I'd moved to an ashram in upstate New York. I waited just enough time to receive Harish's book, Tantra Illuminated, in the mail before leaving. And that book became an invaluable guide for me because it not only clearly articulates the theosophical view of Shaiva Tantra, but it considers how someone today would practice it in the modern world. So I followed those suggestions. I read the book and I went on to study further with Harish and subsequently with several other teachers who were mentioned in Harish's book, actually, and who are now also credited and acknowledged, of course, in my book as well. The discovery of the self is a wild journey. It's no doubt the greatest adventure that that anyone can embark on. It's from this infinite yawning immensity of consciousness that everything is revealed. And most importantly, of course, we're shown in this process how better to serve others, how to be how best to serve others in this human body that we've been loaned for a very short period of time. So here we are, 12 years later, together again with Harish. It means a lot to me, and I'm glad he's going to lead a discussion today. So much has happened over the years. It's really hard to take stock of everything. And of course, there's so much more to come. So Harish, I have no idea what you make of the book. I don't know how this conversation is going to play out, but I do understand you've read it, and I invite you to respond, and let's begin a dialogue and see what arises. So welcome, Harish. Swagatam.
Thank you, Christian. I think you need to start my video, or Chris.
Okay. Maybe I'll make you, here we go.
There we go. As some people have observed, we have a Trika of Chris's hosting the event. And it's wonderful to be connected with Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. Chris Dorsett didn't mention it because maybe he wasn't there at the time, but I spent quite a bit of time at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies when I was at Oxford doing a Master's of Philosophy in Classical Indian Religions. And it was a kind of home for a while. So it's wonderful to be reconnecting with OCHS as well as with Christian, who I have a lot to say about, but I'll keep it brief. In a way, Christian was the ideal student of my book, Tantra Illuminated. And he's the only person that I know of that sought out and studied with every teacher that I mentioned towards the end of that book when considering the modern revival of Trika and Shaiva Tantra generally. So what an amazingly dedicated human this is. who traveled the world to meet all these teachers who taught on the basis of the Trika lineage, and who went on to create incredible works of art based on the Trika lineage, which can be seen on his website. And one of those art pieces is the center of my own personal altar, and it's exquisitely beautiful. So this I didn't intend to give him a plug, but it just came out because his work is amazing, and everyone should absolutely check out the pieces available on his website. This is a historic event that we're having today for reasons that will become clear as I go on. First off, I haven't read the entire book, but I've read a lot of it, and it is astonishing to me, in fact, because I have never, literally never in my life, seen a book of such rigorous research and quality from somebody who doesn't hold a PhD in this field. The book itself qualifies for an honorary PhD as far as I'm concerned. Just incredible, rigorous attention to detail and care and love and intelligence went into this book. And of course, I'm friends with Christian, but my priming is when somebody sends me a book is more the other way. If a friend sends me a book manuscript, I'm usually like, oh gosh, how many mistakes am I going to find in this thing? And I was amazed to find how well researched it is, how well referenced it is, and how free of mistakes it is. So really a remarkable text has been published here by Christian, and I'm sure when historians look back on this time, it will be named as one of the key publications in the ongoing 21st century revival of the Trika lineage and of Shaiva Tantric studies. So I also want to say how significant this book is because a lot of people don't realize the great significance of mandalas for this tradition, not only the Trika lineage, but Shaiva Tantra in general. So I'll just give a few examples. To see the mandala of a given lineage is itself initiation. That is to say, mandala darshana, to see the enlivened mandala of any given tantric lineage, constitutes an initiation, specifically a samaya diksha, the entry-level initiation into that lineage. And in classical times, nobody could be said to be an initiate who had not seen the mandala. So the mandala is absolutely central. And the mandala as a mystic diagram encodes countless features of the theology and philosophy of the tradition and lineage to which it relates. And this is exactly brought out by Christian in his book. It's full of tables and charts. There's this quite astonishing table on, what is it, page 312, detailing all these associations that can be seen within and mapped onto the mandala of the lineage. So for those who thought that mandalas were merely a kind of accessory or adjunct to the tradition, no, they're in fact central. And many, many people know about and have seen the sand mandalas, the mandalas made with colored sand or colored powder by the Tibetan Buddhists, which are a central feature of Tibetan Buddhism. Many people have seen the Kala Chakra mandala, for example. But many people don't know, most people don't know, that this whole tradition of creating mandalas with colored sand that is so associated with Tibetan Buddhism today was in fact originated within Shaivism. So about 1,000 years ago or 900 years ago, the Tibetan Buddhists drew this tradition from Shaivism into their own, not just Tibetan Buddhists, I should say, Tantric Buddhists of all stripes in India, where they were later wiped out, and the tradition survives in Tibet. But yes, this creation of complex mandalas with colored sand is originally an exclusively Shaiva phenomenon. It passed also, of course, into Vaishnavism earlier than it passed into Buddhism, as far as we know. So just connecting some dots for the listeners. And now we have to consider the question of whether Christian has committed a transgression in publishing these mandalas. Aren't they supposed to be secret? They are revealed in scriptures and exegetical texts that were only supposed to be read by initiates, not by the general public. So some might consider, especially those who grew up in the Indian tradition, has Christian committed a transgression through publishing these mandalas? And I'll tell you why the answer is no. Because when you see a visual depiction of the mandala, such as can be found in abundance in Christian's book, you're not actually seeing the mandala itself. You are seeing the blueprint of the mandala, meaning to say, it only becomes the mandala when the mantras are installed. So the mandala is a living, one might say, vibratory, energetic configuration that is mapped onto and installed in the visual depiction of the mandala as found in Christian's book. So therefore, there's no transgression. It's perfectly okay for people to see the blueprint of the mandala. And I say the mandala, but in fact, Christian's book presents us with every variation of the mandalas presented and taught in Abhinavagupta's Tantrāloka. So if you want to be initiated into the Trika lineage, it is not sufficient simply to look at a page of Christian's book. First, the mantras would need to be installed in the mandala properly, according to the ritual tradition. And then when the mandala is said to be brimming over with the energy of the mantras, then to see it constitutes an initiation. And we are told that in classical times, meaning 1,000 years ago, as well as some centuries earlier and later, when this tradition was flourishing, initiates would come before the enlivened mandala blindfolded, right? The mandala brimming with mantric energy, and have their blindfolds removed at the key pivotal moment. And upon seeing the enlivened mandala, people would burst into tears as they felt the power of the mantras in the mandala entering them. So this is considered to be an absolutely pivotal moment in one's spiritual life in the classical tradition. So now, some might have a concern about whether this phenomenon of revival of the Trika is purely a Western phenomenon. And in fact, no, it's not. So the ongoing revival of the Trika, not only as a philosophical spiritual teaching, but as a system of yogic and ritual practice, is happening in India as well. And so, as far as I know, there's a handful of people around the world, including myself, who are performing the full mandala puja, the worship of the Trika mandala, specifically the Trishulabja mandala, the mandala with trident and lotuses, which is the fundamental initiation mandala. So a handful of people in the world are performing the full puja of this mandala according to the prescriptions laid down by Abhinavagupta. And as far as we know, this ritual procedure of the veneration of the mandala, which includes its enlivening with the mantras, hasn't been done for about 100 years. The people, authorities in the Kashmir Valley attest that it was last done there in the 1920s. So we had a gap of, some 80, 90 years in the ritual performance, and now it's being revived. But again, in India as well. So there's a group I'm aware of in Ujjain who have produced a puja padati for the worship of the mandala in Sanskrit and Hindi. People in the West tend to use Alexis Sanderson's padati mentioned in Christian's book for the performance of the ritual. And there's also a group in Kerala, namely the Abhinavagupta Institute, that has also revived the puja of the mandala. As far as I know, the first person to perform the puja after the gap since the 1920s was Alexis Sanderson himself. He performed the full mandala puja at the Nityananda Institute in 1998. And the padati that he produced for that occasion has been passed to others and is being used today, as noted in Christian's book. So these are exciting times for followers of this lineage. And I want to say one more thing about the amazing work that Christian has done, because you might imagine, if anyone wanted to do what Christian's done, all they need to do is to read chapter 31 of Tantrāloka, where the mandalas are taught, and then draw the mandalas as explained there. Well, no, it's not so simple. As Christian has noted in the book, when it comes to secret teachings like mantras and mandalas, Abhinavagupta and other authorities are careful to use language which is at times inscrutable and difficult to decipher, that you need to be deeply studied in the tradition to understand what you're reading, even in a good translation. Recently, Mark Dishkovsky has published the complete translation of Tantrāloka with its commentary, and it's a good translation, not free from errors, of course, but it is a very good translation, and you can read the translation and still not be able to construct these mandalas. So as a artist, Christian has gone deep into Shilpa Shastra, the scholarly tradition in India of the construction of temples, mandalas, murtis, and images, which is closely related to Vastu, which is the science of the organization of space in ancient and medieval India. So all of this study needed to be done before he could accurately reproduce the mandalas that are described in Tantrāloka. And I also noticed in reading the book that Christian read everything published on this subject by great scholars in India and the West. So it's really the best publication that we could have hoped for on this subject, and we couldn't expect it to be bettered in less than a generation from now, in my opinion. Okay, so those are my preliminary comments. First, Christian, do you want to respond to anything that I've said there? Did that spark your thinking in any particular way, those comments?
Amazing introduction, Harish. Thank you so much. You really put it into context in such a brilliant way. Yeah, there's so many things, so many things we can discuss. Perhaps I'll just mention the thing perhaps that steps out at me the most is the ontological distinction that you make between the image of the mandala and the mandala itself. And I certainly thought about that at length when writing the book and composing the images, the ethical dimension, and of course the impact of what it would be to bring these mandalas out. And I do clearly make a distinction between the image and the representation. In fact, even to show an image of a constructed mandala, there was a moment when I was thinking that maybe I should make one in show a patterned representation of the mandala, and I decided not to for exactly that reason that you mentioned. So I appreciate your making that distinction. You mentioned also, I'll just say one more thing perhaps, and you did mention the study of Shilpa Shastra, and it's interesting because I didn't sort of realize I was writing this book until later, and I've really just followed a thread of interest and an intuition, and it just so happened that bringing this book together, everything came together in that way, and the study of the Shilpa Shastra was really the what underpinned my ability to decipher the mandalas. So
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. And I just want to briefly mention one thing, which is you've got this chart of lineage in the book, and it's very interesting and very detailed. And some people will notice, this long gap between Yogaraja, the disciple of Kshemaraja, who lived in the 11th century, and then Swami Lakshmanju's guru's guru, who lived in the 19th century. So this quite long gap in lineage is depicted, and this has led some people to think the lineage must have died out and then was revived in the 19th century. And we have very good reasons to believe that this is not at all the case. And I mention this because a particular Sri Vidya Acharya in India was criticizing me and others online, saying this lineage died out 800 years ago. You have no authority to revive it. And I just want to briefly mention why that's not the case. It's simply that there's a lot of activity in between those centuries, including literary activity, that simply has not yet been published or been written about much in the scholarly literature. So, for example, we know that in the 1600s, the tradition was very much still alive and well. And we have these writings by Sahib Kaul, who creates, among other things, a versification of Kshemaraja's Pratyabhijna Hridaya, the heart of the teachings on recognition, and many other works as well. And we have people writing commentaries on the Trika scriptures in the 1600s, in the 1700s, not only in Kashmir, interestingly, because people think this is just a Kashmiri Shaivism, but no, we have people writing commentaries on the Trika scriptures and original works as well in Karnataka, in the south, in the 1700s, as well as Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So I'm just briefly mentioning some of the evidence, but we do have, in fact, abundant evidence that the tradition survived, even though as a ritual tradition, it died out at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But of course, so when I say revival in my earlier comments, I'm referring to the ritual tradition and some of the yogic practices which died out and have been revived in the last 30 years. But as a lineage-based tradition, meaning teachings being passed on from living teacher to living student in succession, the Trika absolutely did survive, even if we don't have documentation of every single generation in between. So I just want to mention for people who see that lineage chart and see that gap, we can fill in a lot of that gap, but the publications on that have not much been done, but they're forthcoming. So just to say that.
Thanks for mentioning that, Harish. I would also add that the question for me in composing that was, well, what evidence do I have to go on that it wasn't the case? And in a way, there seems to be more compelling evidence, as you said, for the continuation.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you sat with Pranath ji, and he's such a beautiful being, right? A student and informal successor to Swami Lakshmanju. But when I sat with him in Kashmir, it was just like, living proof that the lineage still continues in Kashmir, even though, of course, it's been so attenuated, it's almost gone, but it does continue there. Um, and anyone who sits with Prannathji can't fail to experience the luminosity of his presence, which is much like Lakshmanju's. So just to say that when we speak of revival, we aren't speaking of a completely dead tradition that now we're reading books and reimagining it. It's a living tradition that lost many of its elements due to colonialism, including Muslim colonialism in that word. And so in reviving those missing elements, we are paying homage to and enhancing a living tradition. And thank you for being a part of that, Christian, and also for doing this work that honors the integrity of scholarly knowledge, right? There's been too much of a divide between academic research and practice of the tradition. One can inform the other, and that's what we see in your book very much is that practitioners can be deeply informed by the brilliant scholarship done by non-practitioners as well. And the practice of the tradition creates a context in which the scholarly works become more relevant to a wider public. And I think that's well brought out in your book.
Well,
So
I
go
saw.
ahead.
I just might add. I saw that. I saw that in you when I met and you and reading the book, and I've also had the model of Paul Mueller Ortega, who I think brilliantly displays that synthesis. And I also, yeah, it's we do have this understanding, even within the tradition, also that. That experience must be accompanied by an understanding of that experience, and that the two relate to each other in a symbiotic way. Would you agree? There is
Yeah, of course. Especially in Abhinavagupta's lineage, Abhinavagupta's version of the Trika really emphasizes the importance of refining one's understanding, refining one's intellect, that the intellect cannot um, cause spiritual awakening and liberation, but it's needed to help lay the groundwork for it and also deepen our understanding and stabilize our spiritual awakening. So for sure, it's a crucial part of the tradition. Not everyone needs to become scholars. That's far from Abhinavagupta's intention, but rather everyone needs to refine their understanding. Whenever we're using language, we're drawing on mental or intellectual understanding. And so that needs to be refined in a process that Abhinavagupta called Vikalpa Samskara, the progressive refinement of our conceptual understanding of the nature of reality, which for many people is necessary to stabilize their spiritual awakening. And we can point to anecdotally, we can point to many, many examples of people who've had awakenings, whether Kundalini awakenings or awakenings to the fundamental nature of awareness that didn't stabilize because they had no context for them, they had no community, they had no knowledge, with which to ground those experiences. So it's beautiful that you've been doing that for all these years, and it provides a model for others. But again, not everyone needs to be a scholar. It's sufficient if they just work to refine their understanding. And the number one way is by immersing one's mind in studies and articulations of the tradition, which, could well include your book as well.
Yeah, it's that process of a combination of bhavana, deep contemplation, then nirvachana, the elaboration of those insights that arise in deep contemplation, and also the combination of vyakarana, the sort of self-critique of those insights that have been articulated, that I realized was really it was at first occurring unconsciously, but then very, 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 very consciously occurring basically all throughout the process of making the book. And in fact, I had the advantage in that sense of having an image which served as a direct reflection of my own understandings, and allowed for that refinement to take place in a visual way as well, not only in a self-reflexive way, but in a way that I knew that there was a puzzle, that a pre-existing matrix of the mandala that I had to come up against in a way and test my own insights, because there was of course the translation and the decoding and then the illustration, but then there was also these moments in the process where I really had to allow insights to arise, and then subsequently test those insights and test the mandala, the visual image itself.
Yeah, and I don't know if you plan to show a version of the mandala here, but I did want to mention the sort of central symbology of the mandala, because of course we have a trident with stylized lotuses surmounted on the tips of the trident, as well as a central lotus at the base. And this, of course, encodes the key insights of Trika theology, which is that the three are one. So there's an interesting parallel to Christian Trinitarianism, right? In Christian mysticism, the teaching that God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, which I would call Shakti, are in fact one. And the only difference in the basic triad of the Trika is that the sun is literally all of us, all human beings, because we have Shiva, Shakti, and Nara, or Anu, as you explain in the book, which is the contracted locus of trans-individual infinite awareness into the form of a embodied human. So we have that fundamental triad, Shiva, Shakti, and Nara, the human being, the three that are fundamentally one. And then we, of course, have the trinity of the goddesses, another trinity. So there's multiple trinities, and this is something that Westerners don't immediately understand very well, that you can have in a single image many encodings. And so you can't say, well, this is what it means. No, it means layers of things, right? And so the three goddesses of the Trika, representing, of course, Icha, Jnana, and Kriya, willing, knowing, and acting, the fundamental potencies of consciousness, which converge into and indeed arise out of an even more fundamental potency, Swatantriya Shakti, the power of autonomy or freedom. And so that central lotus at the base, that's near the base of the top of the trident, is representing the three in one. And this is important because it's not four. It's not depicting four principles. It's depicting the unity of the three. So it's a 3+1 pattern where the one is the unity of the three. And so this is a good example of this marriage of understanding and practice, right? Because if you've learned these teachings of the tradition, all of those teachings are intuitively present when you gaze upon the mandala. You don't need to sit there and think to yourself, okay, yeah, Shiva, Shakti, and Nara, and they're one. If you've gone deep enough with the teachings, you just intuitively are perceiving that in the configuration of the mandala. And so that's just a part of what is so beautiful about it. And the fact that that central lotus, which is the summation of the three, the root and source and merging point of the three, is depicted in the center. It's not depicted at some higher point above, which itself is important, because the tradition is teaching that it's not in the most transcendent state that we are most deeply immersed in the nature of reality. It's when we're experiencing the transcendent in the immanent, in embodiment, in flesh, in earth. That's when we are most deeply immersed in reality. So that transcendent principle of that central lotus, right, is simultaneously immanent, which is why it has to be in the middle, not above the three prongs. And it's also more aesthetically satisfying. So I'm just saying stuff that Christian knows well, but maybe some of the audience don't necessarily know. And you could comment on that, but also I wanted to ask you something I don't know, which is about the colors of the mandala and why those particular colors are the ones that were originally used. So if you want to come to that question at some point too, that would be great.
Sure. The design of the mandalas is really, really fascinating. It's a really fascinating thing. And I don't think we have a good answer as to who or how these were conceived. But they're in decoding, particularly the mandala from the Trishu Bhairava Tantra, I had this incredible experience of realization with that mandala of the genius of the way that the lines combine and line up. And there's really an astonishing beauty to the way it all fits together. And also, of course, how much is encoded. I mean, there's really too much we can possibly understand with the mind, but there's it's just I guess it can only be summarized in that what you mentioned before, the impact it would have on the person seeing it for the first time, and then one would assume slowly uncovered over time to whatever depth is possible. But these mandalas too, particularly the trident mandala, is quite unique in my understanding too, that there is this progression from the periphery to the core in a vertical line, as well as from the outside in. I don't know of any other mandalas where that design that particular design is present. And of course, there's more than just the trident mandalas in the book. There's the swastika mandala and the kula mandala, and the triple trident mandala as well, which also is just the triple trident mandala is an incredible genius amalgamation of a synthesis of different doctrines in that one form.
Yeah, and that's significant, of course, because it's the mandala that depicts the merging of the Trika and the Krama lineages, which had already merged by Abhinavagupta's time. And that merging is really what gives this tradition its incredible philosophical and theological power. Of course, we always are speaking of Trika lineage, but in the background, it's the Krama as well, and that merging is depicted in that three Trishulabja mandala, which of course also then manages to include the 12 Kalis in a pattern of 3 times 4, right? So that the 12 Kalis, which are so central to the Krama lineage, managed to get encoded there too. And of course, nobody would have any idea what they're looking at. I mean, it's a really cool design, even if you know nothing.
It is.
But when you get a sense of it, it's just incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's astonishing how much is not only how much is in there, but how elegantly it's all contained. Um, the colors are the colors are fascinating, and very important because they also convey and encode core teachings of the tradition. It's also significant to note that color is so multivalent. It means different things in different contexts, in different parts of the mandala. The meanings shift according to how it's used and where it's placed and so on. And fundamentally, the five elements are represented uh, as white for earth, yellow for water, red for fire, green for wind, and dark or transparent for space. And I actually I consulted Acharya Krishnan about this, and this is included in the book. He gave me a very beautiful explanation of particularly the color green is used for wind because it's the immobile organisms of the earth, the plants, that provide the sustenance for all the mobile beings, which I thought was it's extremely beautiful and also fascinating. But also there's all sorts of other encodings. For example, the four yugas, the four directions, they all become integrated within that same the basic four colors. It's like the 4+1 invisible color in a certain way. The swastika mandala contains a lot more too, because there's the weapons, the guardians of the directions and their weapons and so on. That's a very sort of eclectic, multicolored design. But as with everything in this tradition, everything is important and nothing is by mistake and nothing is improvised, let's say. So I was very, very mindful of that, and delicate too. Um, but the colors are what bring the mandala alive, no doubt.
And in quite a few of the mandala variations, we see prominently the colors black, red, and yellow, and of course white, if that counts as a color. Uh, do do the black, red, and yellow, are they understood to correspond to tamas, rajas, and sattva as well, or do you not see that correspondence? What other
Yes,
correspondences do you see for those
yes.
colors?
Yeah. Yeah, so the outside of the mandala, there's certainly the gunas, but the important thing to note is that the gunas, the rajas guna, the central guna, is divided into two. One is a tamasic rajas, and another one is the sattvic rajas, which is why in the center of the border there is the white and then red and yellow and finally black. So that that encoding of the gunas is there, but there's also inserted a two-sided rajas. Um,
So is the yellow the more sattvic part of rajas?
no, the yellow is the more tamasic, surprising.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Let me check.
So the red is the more sattvic aspect of Rajas.
The red is the more sattvic. That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and then they also correspond to the yugas and the directions. But yeah, so it does it's also directional in terms of the gunas from the periphery to the core. So the core is sattvic, the sattvic white, and then rajasic red, yellow, and then black in the very corners. Um,
Yeah. And this depiction you have of the Trishulabja mandala, which, as I mentioned, is like the visual merging of the Trika and Krama lineages. It is a bit different from depictions I've seen before, and it makes me think that this may be the first time that the mandala is depicted completely accurately uh, in the modern period.
I would
Do you think that's the case?
I mean, I certainly did my best to make sure it was. Let's just say that. And I mean, we're all aware of the important work Alexis Sanderson did with this triple trident mandala and also the mandala of the Malini Vijayotara Tantra. But there were certain aspects, additions and alterations that I created with this version. Um, and I haven't seen it depicted in this way before.
Yeah, it's more precise. Though, of course, yes, we should acknowledge the groundbreaking work of not only Sanderson, but his wife at the time, who never gets enough credit, as far as I'm concerned. Her name is not mentioned in each article that her illustrations appear in. It is mentioned in one of the articles, but she did the drawings of the deities of the tantric deities in Shaivism and the tantric traditions by Sanderson, as well as the final versions of the mandalas that appear in Mandala and Agamic Identity. And these are, of course, the seminal articles in the entire field in many ways. So her work is been tattooed on people's bodies, has been reproduced in many, many books, often without credit. So yeah, we should. I notice in your book you're always trying to give credit to the artist, so we should definitely mention Stephanie
Yes,
Sanderson.
Stephanie Sanderson and Alexis Sanderson are both mentioned in the book. And yeah, there were, I mean, those articles were so foundational too for me first discovering this tradition, of course. And um, yeah, it's taken many years actually to even begin to understand uh, the full depth of that article, of those two articles. But there were yeah, particularly with the triple trident mandala, there were many instances where, I mean, there's so many fine details we could discuss. Um, yeah, sometimes these verses just turned on the page and in my mind for several days or weeks. The particular curve of the tridents and the way they merge in that particular mandala was um, something that was very significant to discover as well, and to articulate properly. And yeah, it was that was very complicated, actually. Um, it's been this process, this spanda process with the work, really, and I hope it does come across in the book. This zeroing in on detail at the same time and expanding out to really consider the full purport and significance of the task. But really, both of those were required to bring
And I know some people in my community have said, "Oh, that this book is expensive." But let's mention not only how much work went into it, but you have all these full color illustrations and figures and depictions. Um, and it's the book is printed in high quality, so it's really the case that that the price, as far as I'm concerned, is actually very reasonable for what you're offering here. It's really as I went through page after page, I just got more blown away. And I hope you're going to share some sort of visual from the book for people.
Yes, I certainly will. I'd like to show something now, and yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the price. I made an announcement, and I said it was an offering, and it certainly is an offering. I can guarantee. Um, the production on a book, it's a large format, 550 page book in color, which it's costly to make it. So.
Hmm.
I certainly made it as affordable as it could be, considering that um, all practitioners really do need to have the book. So
Yeah,
um,
wonderful.
yeah, perhaps I will show an excerpt from the book, unless you have anything else you'd like to mention, Harish.
Well, the only thing I want to mention, because we didn't touch on it, is that you also decode the Kula mandala, which is one of the teachings given in the uh, chapter 29 of the Tantrāloka, which teaches 6 methods of Kula worship. The most infamous of the 6 methods, of course, being um, uh, a worship through sexual union with a consecrated partner. And a lot of people have heard about that. And indeed, that aspect of classical Shaiva Tantra has been blown out of proportion. Though it is the case that Abhinavagupta says it is hugely significant. But he also says that there are 5 other forms of Kula worship that are equivalent to the much lauded sexual sadhana taught in chapter 29. And one of these is the worship of the Kula mandala. And as far as I know, you are here decoding it for the first time with all the relevant divine names and names of the Mahasiddhas and Mahayoginis that constitute the pantheon for Kaula practitioners, which is hugely significant for anyone interested in the Kaula lineages begun by Machandanatha and his consort Konkanamba. So that's really wonderful.
Thank you for mentioning that, Harish. That part of the book and that particular mandala is unique in a sense that there are no Abhinavagupta in any case does not describe the construction directly. We do have an indication or a clue given by Jayarata in his commentary. I think it's on verse 54, and he gives a very brief. And I do think there have been attempts to illustrate this mandala in the past, and I've gone into detail about those. But I do think this is the first accurate rendition of the mandala, and there's a number of things that are fascinating about it. Firstly, it's the mandala from the Matsyendra Samhita, also the mandala, the Kubjika mandala from the Agni Purana. And also, it's just such a simple and it's just such a basic mandala. So it's simultaneously the most secret and the most ubiquitous mandala. Um, and and again, as you mentioned, with the encoding of the various doctrines, it's really incredible how um, we might assume Abhinavagupta curated this ritual. It's hard to say. I'd be curious to know what you think of that, actually. But there is certainly described um, an incredible amalgamation of Trika Kaula and Krama worship within that one very, very simple form. And it was really the indication of the worship and in combination with Jayarata's brief comment that allowed me to see that. And actually, yeah, that was a lot of I went through a lot of iterations with that particular mandala, and it wasn't until quite late in the process that I suddenly saw it.
Yeah, and the form is relatively simple, but you also decode all the relevant names and position the names in the correct places on the mandala, which is what would be necessary if somebody wanted to do worship with that mandala. So that's to me what's very, very significant there. But I guess we're getting close to time, so let's go to your visual.
Yeah, so I would love to show in the book before the illustrated mandala configurations, there is an overview of what I've called the manifestation process, which is known in the Shilpa tradition as Vastureva Vastu, Vastureva Vastu. And I'm going to show you a section from the book, which I've animated, and I'll explain a little about that as it plays. Okay. That's one complete cycle, and it's continuous. So Vastureva Vastu is a sutra from the oral tradition of the Shilpans, which captures the process of the unmanifest becoming manifest. And I visualize it here and in the book over several pages as a process of transmutational geometry based on the cognitions which are articulated by the Rishi Maya in his pre-Vedic text, which is known as the Aintram. And this knowledge of this process was recently brought into public discourse by the late V. Ganapati Stapati, and then further clarified by his disciple Jesse Masay, who has been my instructor in Vastu and Shilpa Shastra. And this pattern is very significant because you might be asking, there's no mandala here. What is it? But all the mandalas in the book, the 5 mandalas, which are in color and in detail, they're all based on either the 8x8 or the 9x9 grids. And in the Shilpa tradition, the individual creativity of the artist is specifically engineered to harmoniously align with this process, which is the pure and unmediated pulsation of reality, essentially, which is understood as universal creativity. The 5 main Shilpa forms, which are visual art, including mandalas, architecture, dance, music, and poetry, they all follow and build upon this fundamental pattern, the same fundamental pattern. It's essentially the process through which formlessness comes into form. And perhaps the most important, in a way, visually important aspect of this process is the transformation from the square to the octagon to the circle. And the process oscillates cyclically and eternally and omnipresently between this the 8x8 grid and the 9x9 grid. So there's so much to say about this particular process, but because this movement of the pages is significant in the book, I wanted to share it with everyone here today, and also because it's really the foundation for all the mandalas, which are all built upon this pattern. So you'll see this right here is the 9 by 9, and there's the 8 by 8. And there's so much more I could say about this. We could spend another 3 hours probably unpacking its significance, but I think now might be a good time for me to hand it back to Chris Dorsett and see if there are any questions.
And very quickly, I want to
Yeah.
mention that in the book, you could stop the animation, I guess, but in the book, you utilize Sharada script as opposed to the much more commonly seen Devanagari script. And this might be confusing to people because most people don't understand the difference between script and language. So they refer to the Devanagari script used all over North India as Sanskrit, when it's actually just one of many possible ways of writing Sanskrit. And in the book, you use Sharada, which is the traditional script of the Kashmir Valley, which is I love it, that you're doing this, because that script has almost completely fallen into disuse, which is a pity because all our old manuscripts from Kashmir are written in Sharada, and soon could be nobody left in India who can read them, only scholars. So it's quite significant to highlight Sharada script, which and it's just to show for a second. So there it is. And so this is Sanskrit language written in Sharada script, and then Sanskrit language written in Roman script. And so that's beautiful that you're highlighting the script of Kashmir in that way.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's interesting. It's an important technological advancement, and it's thanks to the core Sharda team who allowed me to use that for the book. So
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What an extraordinary conversation. I feel like as I've been learning things right the way through, there are a couple of questions. There may be some questions in the room. I don't know. If you hear a voice in the background, it's because somebody's asking me a question here. But I'll go back through them in reverse order. Nicolette Bell asks, I'm wondering how you both feel about the over-reliance on written scriptural evidence of ongoing lineage rather than the oral local enactments and integration with life culture. Is this non-scriptural reality held as an equally valuable source of knowledge, or are these poo-pooed in the academy or by scholarly artists? There. Who wants to go?
No, oral transmission and oral testimony is valued by scholars, and it's valuable to practitioners. It's just that the obvious problem with it is that we can only access oral testimony from living people. We can't access the oral testimony from 100 years ago, 200 years. Well, we do have recordings from the 20th century, of course, but from before the advent of recording technology, we don't have access to any of that oral testimony. So scholars who hear from a oral source, oh, we have done this practice for 5,000 years, just like this. We can't presume that that is factually correct, but certainly what is transmitted orally is valuable both in the documentation of the culture and the tradition and the religion, but also for practitioners. So in fact, oral transmission is considered indispensable if you are a practitioner. So it's not discounted at all. It's only discounted as a source of knowledge for what was happening 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago, but not at all discounted for an understanding of the tradition as it's being transmitted. And indeed, many of the scriptures presume, in fact, all of the scriptures presume oral exposition. They're written in such a way that you can't really understand what's being said without oral exposition from a qualified teacher. Yeah, so that's a huge part of the tradition for sure. And there's a lot to say about that, but I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I'll just add that you completely agree that there's a prior initiatory sadhana is presumed in most of the texts that coming to the text by studying it. But also there's the issue of the certain oral teachings are not to be put into writing as well. For certain parts of the book, I got permission to include specific oral teachings that weren't secret, and those have been included in the book as well. You're muted, Chris.
You've got to unmute there.
Sorry, I
There.
thought I had. Yeah, sorry. I'll move on to another question that came in right very early on, where Melissa Townsend asked, are there plans to exhibit the artwork? If so, where, when? I answered it immediately by saying I thought that one of the things we'd discussed was actually the book itself operates as an artwork. But I wonder if Christian, you'd like to talk a bit more about outputs. Is that the right word? I don't know.
It's such a great question. It's such an incredible question, and it's so important. I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer it in a certain way. Yes, the book is the artwork. The book is the exhibition. It's the mandalas are there for other people to make, and for their own practice, for the continuation of the tradition. And in that sense, I've the intention is that they're fully integrated into the tradition in some way, if it's desirable. So yeah, the book is sort of the object in itself in the exhibition, but the mandalas will have a life of their own. And I mean that's
But it
also
does raise the possibility, Christian. We could do this sometime. I would want to be involved in this. Well, of having an exhibition that is at least nominally for practitioners, because
yeah.
that's who the mandala is intended for, and actually have an exhibition and do a puja as well. That would be
I
amazing.
mean, why not? If it were done, it could be combined. It's a good point. It might not necessarily doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. It could be both, actually.
Great idea. We're certainly up for that. There's a question from Elliot Acuna. Did Abhinavagupta use Sharada script for his works? There.
It certainly seems that way. That the Kashmir series of texts and studies were mostly in Sharda
No,
script.
just to
What's your
correct you,
response to that? Oh, the original
the
script. How do we know?
The KSTS is in Devanagari, but the manuscripts they worked from were almost all in Sharada. And Abhinavagupta probably wrote in a form of Proto-Sharada that was a little bit closer to the Gupta script. So we don't know for sure, but it was probably a kind of Proto-Sharada. And of course, the Indian climate being what it is, there are no manuscripts from that time, right? I mean, there are a few in Nepal, but we don't have any examples of what's called an autograph, meaning a manuscript written by the author of the work. There's literally zero examples of that for any Sanskrit text.
Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, I've got a question here, and then a comment from Nicola. I'll just.
Yeah, thank you so much for your talk. I'll come in.
Hmm.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm also an artist, and I'm from Jain heritage, Jain background, but obviously there's references to mandalas in a similar way. So I'm finding in my research there's a lot of overlaps with current research into quantum physics, and I'm curious about have you searched into that, or have you made any investigations into finding the overlaps of some of the patterns, some of the processes that you're referencing in the book, and also quantum theories and principles?
Big topic. I have mentioned quantum mechanics in the introduction. There is a section about the primacy of consciousness and the distinction between the view of this tradition, which is that consciousness is the fundamental reality, as opposed to materialist view, which is that that all we have is matter. Yeah, the understanding of entanglement and the quantum mechanical understanding of observer dependent reality is very significant in this tradition. I mean, essentially, what I understand is being proven by quantum mechanics is elaborated in these existing texts. With
Well,
regards,
two main things.
yeah, go on.
Two
Hamish.
main things, right? Just that there's no such thing as an observer independent reality, or at least if there is, it's completely unknowable. But we have reason to believe that there is no such thing as an observer independent reality. And then the second being that the universe is non-local, meaning to say it's impossible to separate any part of the system from any other part. Everything is entangled in the entire universe. Just to summarize, these being the two main findings from quantum mechanics that are relevant to this philosophy, but it's very, very, very difficult to understand quantum physics on its own terms, and only specialists can do it. And I think as a scholar, as an artist, we definitely risk ridicule from the physicists if we try to incorporate that material,
Very tentative.
even though they're
Although it has to
yeah.
be mentioned, it does have to be mentioned, and yeah, I know, I totally understand what you mean.
But I also want to mention for the questioner, cymatics. Cymatics is the name for this phenomenon of when you have a metal plate or other vibratory surface, and you have a speaker underneath it that emits a specific tone, and then you have sand or salt on the plate, and you can generate different tones, and the sand or the salt resolves itself into startlingly mandala-like patterns. So not exact replicas of any of our Indian mandalas or yantras, but very, very similar mandala-like patterns. And as you change the frequency of the sound, what'll happen is that the pattern decoheres, right? And it goes back to chaos. And out of the chaos of homogeneous sand emerges a new pattern at the new frequency. So for those who haven't seen that, I strongly recommend looking up cymatics, cymatics, because I do think that is more important than quantum physics in this regard, because it has to do with the correspondence of a mandala-like pattern with a vibration, which is a crucial thing in the tradition. You know, tantric tradition is very synesthetic. The notion that vibrations can be depicted geometrically, and that geometric depictions have corresponding mantric vibrations.
Yeah, I'm also very interested in these overlaps, and I'm working with and to avoid ridicule, because I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm working alongside people who are studying perception, and I think they themselves, well, according to some of the people I've talked to, have said that the philosophy side of physics overlaps a lot with a lot of the concepts that we're talking about or thinking about here, but then they themselves are getting, it's harder to explain, merge with traditional forms of physics themselves. So I guess everyone's getting ridiculed. We might as well we might as well just try and hedge our bets with creating art and still still presenting work. But yes, thank you for the cymatics reference. I work with scripts and languages as well, and cymatics is one thing I would like to explore further whilst here. Thank you.
Okay, well, actually, we're beginning to run out of time, so there are a couple of comments in the chat box which I'll convey to the two speakers, because they're not actually questions, they're messages of support and interest, and I'll get back to anyone who has any inquiries. They can certainly email me if they want to at the centre. There are a couple of things to say. You can there are links to order the paperback and the hardback copies. The paperback is $99 US. The hardback is 108. We have recorded this session, and that will be on the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies website, a link to that. I'm not sure how quickly it will be there, but fairly soon. But I think it's just a moment to try and wrap up and just say we're really grateful for the two of you to have come together like this, and the discussion has been so interesting. I'm sure there'll be lots of further thoughts, and I suspect I shall have quite a lot of things in my email over the next few days. Please do. I can pass on messages and questions that come about, perhaps through watching the recording again. Anyway, it just remains for me to thank you both, and from the library of the Centre for Hindu Studies to applaud you and say goodbye for now, and speak again soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harish. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.